My name's Meghann O'Brien. I also have names in the two cultures that I have ties to on the Northwest Coast. So my name in Haida, the Haida language is Jadkajus, and it was my great-grandmother's name. And my name in the Kwakwala language is Kwahilaga, and it means smoke coming out of the top of the big house, welcoming people to feast and potlatch. And so names in our cultures, like my English given name is something like this kind of weird legal document, and then the Northwest Coast Indigenous names are more carried within a family and passed down through generations, and held in like the family's kind of treasure chest. So I like being able to introduce myself with those names that I presently carry because they're parts of the path through my weaving practice that's reconnected me culturally to the communities that I come from. I've been weaving since 2007, and originally my interest in weaving stemmed from a really strong interest in harvesting wild food and plants. So just have felt really strong sense of connection when harvesting in like the forest or on the land, and that kind of, my weaving kind of grew out of it. And at first mentioning that it might seem disconnected, but I think when you consider the use of baskets traditionally in like many cultures, there's this real strong sense of, you know, them being utilitarian, and I'm personally really in love with objects that are used, and that can be a really interesting distinction, I guess, when you start looking at it from an artistic perspective versus maybe craft or I don't know, these different like kind of avenues of thought, but really the objects are the same. And I also think it's really interesting that from an artistic point of view, craftspeople who have taken it to like another level with it and fought for certain practices to be taken seriously as art forms as well. So I guess this kind of strong vein in my own practice of it being rooted in being able to be used. As I started weaving other pieces other than baskets, I started encountering, I guess, the contemporary native art world and how our people, since like the potlatch ban was lifted in the 1950s, and how this kind of like long history of collecting on the Northwest Coast, so between anthropology museums and then the contemporary art market, finding a place for these works to be used in a contemporary context, because a lot of the times with weavers today that do sell their work on that platform and to private collectors, a lot of the times their only function is hanging on a wall as art. And so I wanted to kind of expand on the idea of like a medicine bag or a potlatch bag that our people will use sometimes in ceremony, sometimes just in regular life or special events. So just kind of elaborating on that idea and on the function, or not the function, but like the kind of innovating how like the structure of it rather than going wild with like color and different designs. So I've developed like this way of hanging the warp on the loom. So usually this piece would just kind of like be like a teardrop shape and hang from the neck with the fringe. So that's kind of, instead of having the loom warped with like one single strand down like that. So you end up with kind of like a straight line at the top. You still have it with this, but I like that. And I kind of like thinking about the crossovers in traditional practices. And one of the areas that is still, I mean, where it's a really high level of skill, I think, is in the haute couture world of fashion and making. And I'm kind of really drawn to that and seeing some of our practices as parallel to that. And wanting it to be a part of the contemporary space of our lives today, as well as being in museums. I mean, most of the Northwest Coast cultures are like heavily community focused and driven, like our use of the ceremonial weavings in the potlatch societies that are still functioning. That's a really strong motivating factor of seeing the pieces used in our communities and by our people. So that's really strong. And then as a subset to that, I feel a strong sense of connection with some of the people outside of the realm of weaving that I've kind of grown up as a weaver or like a native artist in. Kind of working at Bo Dick's house with his daughter, and then kind of this younger group of carvers but I worked in Prince Rupert for quite a while with Willie White, who's a Tsimshian master weaver and teacher, and he's got 4 or 5 students, and that kind of core group of weavers is a really special sense of connection to them. I've been, like, the people I've worked with are really, it's just like, we describe it as like this really, really delicate thread. Like Jenny Clenott was the one weaver who was traditionally trained, and in her 90s, in the 1980s, she was in her 90s, and she broke tradition and taught openly to people outside her family. So there's a lineage of weavers that come from her that have been trained outside of her family line. So my teacher comes from that line, and there's a real strong sense of like preservation of cultural knowledge and the techniques, and a real sense of respect that they've embedded in me for those aspects. But part of the conversation I'm interested in having as well has been unexpectedly with technology, completely not with like digital looms or anything like that, but I had a piece that was on loan to different institutions for a few years after I finished making it, and it hadn't had a chance to be used. So we actually decided to seek out a group to work with to 3D print that piece. So we've gotten as far as making a digital reproduction, so it's like an animation that parallels like the process of making a digital image and how the image is captured and all that, and all the different processes in the computer to replicate that image in a really high fidelity form that has a lot of structure and looks kind of lifelike with the process of making. There's just interesting parallels with that. And one thing I'm super drawn to in the technological realm was through that conversation and process with this group called Making Culture Lab. We kind of came across that the origins of the computer are actually kind of lie with, I can't remember her name right now, but it was a weaver. The Jacquard loom is said to be like the first version of computer coding. And it's really kind of interesting, like that weaving and the computer technology are kind of like at the same place, and it's interesting. Because the materials that are traditionally used in the Chilkat weaving practice are mountain goat wool and yellow cedar bark. So those are both fibers that come from the Northwest Coast. There's a bit of a disconnect with the use of mountain goat wool because in the Kwakwaka'wakw territory, it was in the 1960s, there was a lot of helicopter logging. So at that time, the elders I've talked to who were teenagers then, they said, we backed off and stopped hunting mountain goats then. But those practices have kind of fallen off of use, I guess, for a really long time now. So we use a lot of other fibers as well. So I like working with cashmere, and some weavers like working with merino wool. So that's a bit of a replacement for the original. But I think just the nature of the cultures on the coast, it really is influenced by the environment here. I'm speaking from my own kind of little bubble, which is working with traditional practices from the people of the Northwest Coast. So it's definitely very distinctive, and there's a lot of scholars who've devoted a lot of time and research in creating books and like systems for talking about the different styles. So there's just like subtle differences with the carving. You'll see from Tlingit to Haida, Tsimshian, Salish, all over. It's totally varied, but really distinctive. And sometimes I like to think that they come from cultures that lived really tied to the land for a very long time, and within trade as well, but that the art forms kind of like vary, and the language differences vary just as much as the geography. So it's kind of cool, the title of this exhibit. And then of course we have like so many, it's really interesting because we have those parts of our origins here on the Northwest Coast, but then we have like immigration, and like Canada's so multicultural, so many different cultures bringing pieces of themselves from wherever they came from that have integrated with that, and yeah. Yeah, just that I was really, when I dropped off my piece and it was in the process of being installed, I was really excited about the diversity of practices represented, and just really excited about the way that some of the people that I really look up to artistically being included, and just seeing how they speak together and kind of bouncing just really cool energy in the room.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.